Awesome. All right, and I'm going to hand it off to Jason. So if you do you have permission to share your screen?
Let me try. Uh, it looks like I do, and I want to make sure. Let's do desktop and share sound so you can hear.
Yeah.
Do you see a screen that looks like an old VHS footage from like the 90s?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, great. Um, and Craig, how long would I could talk about my previous work for 5 minutes. I could talk about for an hour. What's the ideal range? What would be the most useful to
We
you
could
today
do
in
like,
terms of me covering work? And then I won't have enough time to
let's
do the live
say
demos.
half hour 45 on the work, and then we'll do another half hour 45 on the demo. Does that sound good to you?
I can easily do that.
Okay, awesome.
Great. Um, Thank you for having me. I know, we all lived through the pandemic, and so, a presentation on a screen is challenging. Last year, I was in person there. This spring, I'm traveling for work, so I'm in Berlin, Germany right now, and that I'll be doing some of my musical neurofeedback work. I'll do some integrations in China, in Shanghai coming up in April. So I took this semester off from New York. But I taught last year. I do a lot with ITB, but I teach over at Collaborative Arts, which is at the Tisch Building in the city at the Washington Square campus. And I teach electronic music and have sections specifically about this type of EEG music. It's an undergrad program, so I really enjoy that. Um, just a little bit of background before I talk about the EEG work, just so you have a sense of context um, and what led to this work. So I'm 48. In 1995, I'm guessing most of you weren't born, but in 1995, I got my first drum machine and started making electronic music. And so I made hardcore, breakcore, a bunch of really obscure subgenres. I tended to play small shows, like a good show would be, I don't know, 30 people, 100 people. Um, and did a lot with experimental music, all with hardware. So it was pre-software. In 1996 was the first time I meditated. So I grew up in the state of Iowa, kind of near Chicago. And through the techno and rave scene, I met these other young people who came from Fairfield, Iowa, which is this small town in the middle of a bunch of cornfields. And there's this huge uh, meditation university there. And so it was a transcendental meditation with Maharishi. I never learned that technique directly, but just being around those people, I was like, what's meditation? And started to get interested in what happens if I just sit? Like, coming from a society that's so focused on like work and production and, industrialization and capitalism, what would it happen if I just sit and like close my eyes? And so that was beginning my meditation practice. And then I've also off and on have programmed computers since I was 13. So it's not been consistent, but when I was 13, I got a book on it was like basic, like MS-DOS basic. It was 1989. I think it was a Tandy, which was like a Radio Shack computer. Again, I'm not going to quiz you on any of these terms in like 30 minutes, but anyways, so I've programmed computers, I've meditated, and I've produced electronic music, each of those for about 30 years now. And so those three paths essentially were independent for many years. I meditated, I made music, and I programmed computers and for work, and then made music for fun and meditated for my mental health and creative practice. Uh, but in what was it? Late 2017, I had a vivid dream about this kind of work. And 2018, it was just an Instagram ad, but it was for this headset. So it's the same headset that's in the room there that Craig has. And it's a Muse headset. It's a company out of Canada called Interaxon. And exploring with different ways of making music, Bluetooth devices. How do I convert data signals into MIDI in order to compose music either on like synthesizers, samplers, Ableton, whatever. So how do I do data conversion? And then when I saw this, I thought, fuck, like if I can put this on my brain and like be able to convert the data of my, at first I thought, can I, convert the data of my thoughts and somehow translate it into notes or compositions? And um, I mean, it's just like, it felt like a superpower. It felt like Professor X or some sort of like mutant superpower to be able to like do telepathy with a machine, so can I think something in my brain and change, like send commands into my computer or my drum machine or my synth? And so I got this, I ordered one, built a quick prototype based on some motion sensor work I had been doing with dancers and Bluetooth sensors. And I put it on, hooked up my synthesizer, and the goal was if I can drop a certain brain wave, can I send a MIDI note into a synthesizer that I'm not touching, like completely like telepathic, telekinetic, like can I do something in my brain and play a note on a keyboard that's 4 feet in front of me? So I put the thing on and I'm like, and it lights up. I have a complete eureka moment of like, if I can play a note, eventually I could create potentially, and as we'll see, a whole symphony of like brainwave music. So some of the first things that I learned about this is no, I can't think of like a C note or an E note and then it comes out. You can get that type of fidelity, but you have to do surgery and like go into the brain. So you have to like physically implant chips in the brain. I haven't tested that. That's not my interest. I'm delighted that these things are outside the brain and you don't have to have surgery to use this type of system. But the thing about EEGs is that they're outside of the skull. And so a good metaphor to think about as you're exploring this work is it's like being outside of a stadium. I can't hear individual conversations in a stadium, but I can hear, is there a game being played? Or people cheering? Or people booing? Are they silent? So I can get a general sense of what the crowd is doing, but I can't hear those individual conversations. So that's similar to using an EEG. You can get a sense of what the brain is doing on a more macro level, like what the weather's like, but you can't detect like individual raindrops. You can't like, I'm thinking this word and then it, comes out. As EEGs get better, um, maybe that's possible. So I'm only speaking of, what I've learned over the last, never do math in front of people, 2025, 2018, was that 7 years? Um, and I'd be delighted to be proven wrong. Like if some of you find a way to like think specific things, maybe it's possible. Like definitely try to do that. Don't let anything I say about my own experience dissuade you from trying to do something as magical and interesting and innovative as possible with these devices. So this is just my own personal experience. So I messed around with this for several months and then I started doing shows. So my background was in electronic music and techno. And so my first iteration with this brainwave technology was, can I do a full techno set with my brain? Can I essentially DJ with my brain where I don't touch the gear, just do things in my head and like do a techno set? And this footage we see on the screen, it must have been like an iPhone, I don't know, like 6 or something, an iPhone 5. I mean, it looks like VHS footage from. Anyways, I'm just gonna click through a little bit. Let me know if you hear the music. Just like give me a thumbs up. Just I want to make sure that I shared audio in a good way. So let's give this a shot. Great, thank you. I just said hands off, and here I am like fiddling with the volume or something. But for the most part, come on, let's jump around. So I'm attempting to do different things. So I'm like moving my hands, meditating, trying to activate different parts of my brain based on the mapping. And these lines that are being, just realize Can you hear me when the music's playing?
A little bit, maybe a little lower volume on YouTube. Yeah,
How's that?
that's good.
Okay. So I'm trying different this is all exploration. That's what's great about art-based research, uh, which ITB really focuses on, is what can I do to create an effect? And so for the most part, I'm moving between a stimulated state and a relaxed state, and crossing that threshold between stimulated and relaxed, which I'll show you how to do that with the muse. I'm changing the filters, I'm changing the effects. So I'm like opening and closing reverbs, I'm opening and closing filters. And I've got these stems laid up, kind of like DJing, but I have it broken down into like bass stems, drum stems, hi-hat stems. Does stems make sense? Is anyone produce music? Any music producers, just raise your hand. If no one's produced music, that's fine. Okay, crickets. So you can do the same thing with like an AI stem separator. You like put a rock and roll song in, and it will separate just the vocals, just the drums, just the bass. And so I'm assembling stems in real time using this system and then mixing them together. And then I did discover, it was totally wild with this thing, like if I mentally thought left or thought right, I could kind of get a change in values. So I use that for crossfading. So I would like think left or think right and kind of move the energy without touching my face, but moving the energy to the left or right side of my head, and it would move the crossfader in my software. And so I could mix from track to track, and then the new one would automatically load, and then I would shift back. And so I was able to do these techno sets. I ended up getting to like a full hour techno set um, strictly from my brain. Any questions on that so far? All right. Um, so I started touring with this, and at the second show, this is kind of weird footage because I had two cameras and I mixed it. It was kind of this interesting festival called Feed Me Weird Things. So it's kind of this like trippy hallucinogenic festival. And so you kind of see me over here, and then I'm also over here. So it's two cameras mixed together. And the important thing about this was only my second show, but the important thing about this was I was on stage, I was meditating. It was a huge sound system, big speakers just blasting my body with the bass waves of the kick drum. And I got so relaxed that I drifted down into a dream state. I forgot where I was. I lost track of time. And I was still conscious because of the stimulation of the sound, but I started to dream. And that was, I'd never gotten that relaxed on a stage before. I'd been performing since 95, 96. I'd never gotten that relaxed before on stage. And it was because of neural feedback. My brain was doing activity, it was manipulating the sound in real time. And then I heard the manipulation, and it creates this feedback loop. And normally when I meditate, I can dip down a little bit or do like a focus and stimulate myself a bit. But with this, I meditated and dropped down, and then the music would get dreamier. So the music was matching my mental state. And then as the music got down, I was able to go even deeper into meditation, and the music would get deeper. And then I went deeper and went deeper. And then I just laddered down from normal waking beta wave consciousness, which is what we're in right now, down to a relaxed alpha state, and then down into a waking dream state. And that is essentially the same as hypnosis, or neural therapists try to get their patients down into this like very safe, cozy theta state, because you can really do a lot of work with like post-traumatic stress and rewiring belief systems in the brain. And it's a very cozy place. And we all go through theta as we're falling asleep each night, but we usually just plummet through it so fast that we can't stay in theta and experience the creativity and the safety that comes there. So they end up becoming,
Hey, hey,
yeah,
Jason.
yeah,
I feel most of the class at this point isn't maybe super familiar with the distinction between like what EEG is actually detecting. Like you're saying theta and these kinds of things. Like maybe just
sure.
give us quickly like what is this sensor detecting
Yep,
and what do those different wave segments of that waveform actually represent or how do they relate to different things?
that's a great question. All right, let's grab an image that we can use. Where is it? Here we go. All right, so the EEGs, so if you can see on this, and perhaps there's a headset in the room, there's these gold sensors on the front of the band. And what they're detecting is the electricity both coming from your forehead. And so there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of muscle noise that you have to work around. And so these tend to work best if you're still, like if you're meditating and your body is still. But if you are, then it starts to pick up on the electricity in your forebrain. And our brains are always producing this full spectrum of uh, electricity. And there's also sensors on the ears. So it picks up kind of behind the ears, the back of the skull. These sensors are, the ear sensors are rubber, so they're not as high fidelity as the forehead ones. The metal ones are really the best. And when you put it on and your skin is dry, the signal isn't super strong yet. When you have it on for like a minute or two and you start to sweat or just have a little bit of sweat or oil on your skin, the connection gets better. And you can also like dip your finger in water and run it along the sensors themselves to create a better connection, so the electricity likes the water. And have you all done fast Fourier transforms?
Probably it's probably not a super common concept.
Okay. FFT or fast Fourier transform is what every like stereo, if there's a visualizer on a stereo or like a software that plays music and you see some sort of visual responding to it, all of that uses an FFT. And so essentially it gives you, it takes a time-based signal, like music is a media that plays over time, and it has a buffer that analyzes sound as it's streaming through, and then it can turn it from time-based to frequency-based. And it's from math, I think in the 1800s, a guy named a Frenchman, a mathematician for you. And so when you have this frequency, essentially you have your bass and your mids and your high, and you can do the same thing with brain waves. So, these sensors are detecting changes in the electricity in my brain. Um, this is 256 hertz. So 256 times a second. It's just like grabbing these packets of what is my brain doing, and then it sends it Bluetooth to the computer about 30 packets a second. It like bundles them up, and the Bluetooth communicates about 30 frames a second. And what you get is you get this raw electrical data and you run it through a fast Fourier transform. And you take this time-based information, which is flowing in, 256 times a second, and you create a buffer and then you analyze it, you run it through a fast Fourier transform, and just like a music signal, you can turn it and you get this frequency response. And so you've got your low frequency, like in music, it would be bass waves, you've got your mids, and then you've got your highs. But for brain waves, neuroscientists have created these different bandwidths that again, it'd be like bass, mids, and highs. So like delta is your lowest brainwave. And we've got can you see my cursor?
Yep.
So down here you have delta, it's the slowest one. So it can be every chart you look at, you're going to see different numbers. So it can be like zero 0.1 hertz, 0.5 hertz, 1 hertz, up to about 4 hertz. Do you know hertz, that measurement? I see some
Yeah.
nodding. Yeah, so it's how many cycles per second. Um, most of these frequencies, if they were sound, no, these are electrical signals. They're not sound, but if they were sound, most of these would be below the level we could hear. So, if I take delta waves, it's like 4 hertz and try to turn it into a bass sound, our ears can't hear it. It's just too low. Like, these waves, if it were a sound wave, would be like the size of the building. They're just these massive, massive, like very, very slow, huge waves. Um, so delta waves are when we're deep asleep. So not when you're dreaming, but just like blackout sleep. Your brain is repairing itself. Your body is repairing itself. That's a delta state. So when your delta waves are highest, you're in like this like deep, deep sleep. As I go up from like delta to gamma, you get more and more awake. So the lowest frequency is you're the most unconscious, and then you start moving up in terms of more and more stimulated states of consciousness. And as that's the brain waves speed up and go faster and faster to gamma, which is the highest forms of consciousness. So delta is the foundation, body repair, brain repair. Um, you will see a ton of delta on this EEG, and it's not really delta. It's just muscle tension. So that's one of the things of using this device because it's on the forehead. Let's get this on. If I blink or move my eyebrows or even just talking, that muscle movement is such a loud signal that it's going to block any brainwave signal. So it'd be the equivalent of if I'm on one side of the room and I'm trying to talk to my brainwaves on the other side of the room, and then someone walks in between us just hollering and shouting, that's the brainwave interference. And so I need my muscle, I'm sorry, that's the muscle interference. So I need my muscles to be still in order for me to hear what's going on in my brain because the muscle movement is going to it sends you'll see it when you put this on. It sends huge spikes in the data, and it's all just muscular tension. It's not what's going on in the brain, and so having a still face and a still forehead allows me to hear that quiet conversation across the room, which is the brain waves. Um, so probably when you're using this, you won't actually pick up on really strong actual delta unless you're in like a sleep lab and get some classmate to like get deeply, deeply asleep. So delta is mostly noise. Any questions about delta before I move to theta?
I'm just gonna write some notes from what you're writing down, so we can refer to them as you're presenting your work. But
Okay,
you can move on to the rest of them, and yeah, we might be running a bit short on time to show the work, so you can just kind of tell us what each band kind of represents for now.
absolutely. Yep. So theta is dreaming. Um, so your brain is more active than that blackout sleep. And theta is you can get there through deep meditation, but it's going to be the highest amplitude when you're dreaming compared to the others. And so eh, these brainwave, the activity of these brainwaves aren't. It's not like just one happens at the time. They're all happening all the time. So we all have delta waves that are active right now. We all have gamma waves that are active right now. So when I talk about like being in delta, in a delta brainwave or an alpha brainwave, that just means its amplitudes are higher than the others. It's the dominant wave. So theta is dreaming. A lot of the work I did in my thesis at NYU was how to get people through sound design into a theta state um, while they're still awake, and so they can still like hear and navigate through their brain, but experience this dream state, this waking dream state. Uh, Next level up is alpha, and that's like a meditation. So as soon as you just close your eyes, your alpha is going to start going up. You're going to start moving just a little. It's like dipping below the surface of the water. You start moving into towards the subconscious. But if someone said your name or if you needed to be alert, you could wake up immediately. So it's just a little bit under waking consciousness. And alpha is the easiest to detect with the muse. So if you can clear your mind, close your eyes, start to surrender, relax into the moment, you're going to see alpha go up. And then beta waves are what we're in right now. So problem solving, listening, talking, communicating. If you're typing, if you're looking at a telephone, like all that is beta waves. And that's part of the addiction of devices is that it constantly demands our attention. So we've got this whole economy of grabbing attention. And so we get addicted to devices where we constantly have to look at our phones because it's spiking our delta wave or beta waves. The consequence of that, of always using these devices, is it doesn't give us time to dip into alpha and dip into theta, which is where we really get the most creative ideas and creative solutions. So, coming from the engineering school, if you can meditate, if you can take breaks from these devices, you can drop down into these deeper insights and deeper understanding that your brain can produce. But if you're constantly stimulated at beta, you're just using a really small thread of what is available in the brain. And then the fastest is gamma. So it's at the very top. And these are sometimes it's called as like happiness and joy, but it's really more about joy for others. And each of these steps become more accessible as you get older. And so, like a kid doesn't have a lot of gamma waves because their brains are small, and that your brain is an engine that is producing electricity, and it just isn't big enough to produce these high frequencies. And so, like babies, they're in delta. Toddlers, they have delta and theta. Adolescent, you're starting to get up to alpha. Young adult, beta. And then really, you have to be like early 20s, 23, 24, 25. When your brain is fully developed, you start getting access to gamma. So it's not happiness, it's like, it's the type of joy you feel when someone else is happy. Like that's more of an adult feeling. Like you have a kid and you're delighted about your kid's joy. That's gamma. It's also experiences of like insight, intuition, breakthroughs. It's like the tingles you get when you're really grateful for life and just feel a sense of awe. That's that fastest frequency. Um, any questions about any of the brain waves? What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, we can continue looking at some more projects. We'll get into more of the kind of technical basis afterwards too.
Great. So I did techno shows for a period of time. And then the pandemic hit, and I dove deeper into the tech. I hacked into the devices on a lower level. I learned more about FFT. I learned more about what these brain waves, what produces them. And I did this pandemic show. It was like November of 2020. It was like an outside show. And it was at night, and I thought normally I project the brain waves on a screen behind me. So, a format that's like something like this. This was a sound festival in Berlin. I'll turn the volume down, but just so you can see the visual, I'm projecting my brain waves on this screen behind me, and there's different visuals that come based on how deep I'm meditating. And so at this show that in this space, I was in the dark, so I was like, what if I project the brainwaves on me, on my body? And it ended up being this really kind of like Tron, um, really futuristic kind of robotic look. Um, and so it was the next iteration in this in my aesthetic. And then I cleaned it up, and this was pandemic show that was getting back into techno, but became very alien, very electronic, really removed my humanity. So it's this very like menacing, and it's the color is based on my brainwave state. And I started tapping into the other cool thing about these is it has a heart rate monitor. And so I could set the tempo of the music with my heart. So if my heart's going fast, the music speeds up. If I start to relax, the music slows down. And that also becomes a biofeedback loop. So if the music naturally starts to, break apart and become more relaxing, my heart starts to relax. So there's this very symbiotic relationship between myself and my flesh and the technology that I'm using. So it's this very cyborg transhumanism type of work. And my goal with it is how do I become more vulnerable? So, that's probably a theme coming up in the classes. Can I, instead of using technology to get numb, like if I look at my phone, I'm not in my body anymore. Like I'm in the device, like I really don't feel like my legs or my arms, like it's so engaging. I disassociate. And so can I use technology instead to bring me back into my body, to this idea of effective computing? Like how do I use technology to show me myself? It's like this mirror where it creates this neurofeedback loop where I get to experience the joy of being a human being and the joy of being alive. Um, I messed around with this aesthetic a bit. This is coming out of the and so I'm projecting these brainwaves on my body, and it becomes more abstract and started to become more meditative as well. And so instead of this like abrasive techno that's menacing, which is great aesthetic, and I will continue to explore, but I started doing these. I learned Tai Chi when I was 19. And so I started doing these Tai Chi type movements and seeing how my brain would react as I'm projecting my brain waves. And then the sound is being produced by my brain as well. And then I went to grad school. So I finished my undergrad in 98, 25 years of working in industry and being an artist. And I went to grad school at NYU at the ITP. They have a 1 year program that is New York, Berlin, Shanghai, which is partially why I'm in Berlin right now. And I mean, I'm just going to tell you rather than like play a video where I describe it to you. But one of the first projects was hooking up this EEG to a base woofer underneath a petri dish of water. And so if I could clear my mind, the water would be still. And then if I can activate my brain, these really beautiful patterns would come up in the water. Um, just to see some of this footage. So the water itself, let's get to some of the water footage, is being activated by my brainwave state. And there was something, I think this is the power of engineering. Like I'd been using my brainwaves to make music and, project lights, but to change something physical really stunned people. They're like, okay, like now there's something really, really engaging here, to be able to physically change matter by changing my brainwave state. So that ended up being a very engaging piece. Um, Through my thesis work, I explored um, how to help people get into the theta state, into this waking dream state. Whether I try or not, all of this footage ends up looking like a cult. So it's like this, a bunch of people lying around, like listening to my heart and my brain. And so it's definitely has these like culty vibes. So the pulsing is triggered by my heart. The color is my brainwave state. So red is stimulated, blue is meditative, and purple is me kind of getting between those. So as I get deeper into it, these drones come up, it's being produced by my brain. There's this subwoofer, you can't really see it, but it's this black square. A little bit. This black square over here is this massive subwoofer. So people are feeling my heartbeat and these drone waves go through the room. So essentially, I'm inviting, this is like 45 people into my brain. And so as I relax, they relax, and we start to experience something called entrainment. And so if I amplify my biometric, if I put on one of the headsets, amplify my heartbeat, amplify my brain wave, and I use a sound design that mirrors what's going on in my brain. So if I relax, I play more relaxed. Other people's body and just go at this, numerous people would say, I try to get my heart to go slower, faster, worse, but it keeps just syncing up. Um, Also similar to like being in the womb. You got this, I think this universal music that we all experience is we all spent several months in the womb with crazy stuff going on.
Hey, Jason, I think you might have to make the audio quieter. It's kind of interrupting your voice.
Sure.
Yeah.
Um, I can play the anime, just mute it. Um, So essentially, it's like a womb as well. So it's like being in your mother's womb. Because for me, I think that's the universal music is a repetitive beat because we all spent several months in the womb with a heartbeat, above us, and we're just experiencing this pulse over and over for 9 months before we're born. So these sound baths, I did a bunch of different iterations in New York, and then over in Shanghai for my thesis work. This was in Brooklyn at the Spatial Audio Lab, so I used all 50 speakers in the Spatial Audio Lab to sonify my heart and brain. And this is over in Shanghai in their extended reality lab. Um, and started to just do different aesthetics. I had this big black circle, so it was kind of this eclipse theme. And I did some experiments with noise, so sonifying stress states. So everything we've seen before has been sonification of meditative states, but you can also sonify stress states. So I would turn that into these electrical sounds and turn it into um, noisescapes. And what happens is you get into the stress feedback loop. So the more stress that I feel, the louder it gets, and then I get more stressed out. It is a bit more dangerous and volatile to use stress feedback loops. Um, Typically, when people came into the sound baths, people would feel relaxed, they would unwind. When I did these stress feedback loop performances, or the one in Shanghai, people's reactions were really, really varied. Some people got headaches. One person got dizzy, left the room. A friend who was a heavy drinker, like just stared right into it and he loved it. Another friend who was a meditator was really into it. And I had a friend who was hyper and it just put her to sleep. So very different reactions to the same system. I'll just play a little bit of this. So it's just like abrasive, these electrical sounds. Um, and then I'll finish up just with like some really great opportunities that came up for me after I graduated. First was, let's see if we can get, it was an art show in Dubai, and I was working with a VR team in Brooklyn, and we showed at this really fantastic gallery over in Dubai called Leela Heller. And what we did is we took, it was novel for me. So we took these EEG headsets and we put it inside a MetaQuest 3 VR headset. And when someone puts on the headset, it's an extremely good fit because as you tighten the headset, the electrodes just press right against your head and it's an extremely good fit. And what we would do is someone would control these, augmented reality, control these water particles that were moving around. So if they could get into a clear, cohesive mental state, um, it would become a sphere, and if their brain waves were scattered, it would break up into different pieces. Um, and so it was a novel use for me. And then just two more things. This one is I finally started exploring multiple EEGs. So what if I'm not wearing the EEG and I put the EEGs on, like, this was 8 different people. And so it's their brains sending the music in and it becomes a symphony. So, that first eureka moment back in, 2018 of, if I can do a note, eventually I can do a symphony. This is the beginning of that symphony. So I've got all these different people meditating. And as they meditate and they have peaks in their alpha waves, it launches notes into a group composition. This piece then I took to the Smithsonian Hirshhorn in Washington, D.C. There was a festival there called Sound Scene, and it did these series of workshops in DC with random people. And it was really a test of, can this system work in a place that's noisy, not dim? Because normally I can craft the space, I can make it cozy and help people relax. But these were just strangers walking by in a museum that would sign up for these brainwave symphony sessions. And it was remarkable. So just to show the power of neural feedback, people forgot where they were. They lost track of time. A number of people wept. I mean, as an artist, to have someone be moved to tears, I mean, that is an ideal as an artist to be able to impact people that way emotionally. And people felt these new forms of intimacy, like they'd hear their own brain waves and heartbeat, but they would also hear their friends. And of course, they had never heard their friends' heartbeat or brain waves. So working with groups and having multiple people compose at a time creates a new type of intimacy where people, they're not talking, they're just sitting, listening to each other's brains make music. So it's very similar music as the previous, but some footage from these sessions. This is a documentation, so it's not a performance, but it's me describing the process. Um, so really a great opportunity to present the Hirshhorn. And then all these talking head performances. But then something that was huge honor was to be able to bring my work into the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And there was this exhibit on these really gorgeous Buddhist mandalas. And I was using a different headset. So it's these headphones, they're called Eno phones. And they've got EEG prongs at the top and then right in front of the ears. And so we worked with a class, and the students would come in, they'd put on these EEG headphones, and then hear their brain create different meditative tones as they looked at the mandalas. If they were distracted or stressed out, they would hear these ocean waves. But if they could settle down and calm themselves, they would start to hear these meditative tones. And the tones themselves were from the mandala art. I scanned the mandalas, I had these digital scans of them, and I would do a pixel to frequency converter. I can send a PDF if you're wanting to learn more about that process. But the sounds themselves came from the art. So it was a very well integrated project. Um, and what I'm doing, I'll just finish up and say that, in Berlin, I helped with the January term here. I've done a few EG sessions here. One was at this really lovely ambient, it's like a living room where I did multiple, multi-person brainwave sessions while a friend DJ'd, another one did gongs. So it was this nice multimedia fusion. And then in April, I'm heading over to Shanghai using these EEG headsets again, and I'm integrating it into a luxury hotel there. So it's these art projects leading to like really well-paying corporate projects that use my art, use my technology, integrated into it's a wellness and well-being campaign over in China. And so it's using meditation, it's using the soundscapes I've created where clients will walk into or guests will walk into a luxury suite on these headphones and people hear their brainwaves. I'm stunned that the hotel decided to go for this, but that's why I'm traveling this semester. So that's a really good snapshot of where I started with literally a techno show in Des Moines, Iowa, to being at the Met and having these great opportunities emerge over in Asia. I will stop sharing my screen. Um, and really, Craig, what would be the most helpful? A demo, questions?
Well, yeah, let's maybe just start with like, does anyone have any questions about any of the specific projects we saw or any, I have some specific questions just about, because Jason has a lot of experience working with this technology and like, I think just sort of thinking about the kinds of ways that he's applying it in his work, and I don't know how that might lead to some of the questions we're asking in this class. But did anything jump out to anyone that you wanted to ask about? Yeah.
Mentioned at the beginning that you started with like a DJ set where you were like crossfading, like going like focusing on left to right, and I forgot what else you were doing, like focusing on specific actions within the music. I wonder how you kind of pivoted between that to your more like I forgot what the timeline was, but the next thing I think you showed was the show in which you entered that dream state. And I'm wondering, like, first of all, how was that experience different? Because in my mind, I was imagining it would be kind of exhausting, or like it would take a lot of focus to try to focus on left and then focus on right. And like, how was that process different? And also what, or if it was different at all, and what led you there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. With those early techno sets, that would be the most stressful part of the set was when I was crossfading from one song to another. Once the crossfade was complete, I could then let go and move back into a relaxed meditative state. And the way I was working with it is that the meditation, so alpha waves would get higher and the music would get bassier and dreamier. So I was changing the effects and changing the EQ. Um, and then when I was more stimulated, it would get kind of crisper, more resonant and sharper. The reverb would retract and the track would get crisper. And that tended to happen between all the crossfades because I would have to start to focus again. And the way I did the crossfades is I found this really small window in beta. So when you look at the full spectrum that we'll see soon, I just zoomed, there was just this part of beta that I saw that there was a discrepancy between the left sensors and the right sensors and realized, if I kind of like think left or think right, it consistently would work, to be able to drag a left signal or a right signal. But it definitely was stressful, to do those crossfades. And then was the next question is how did I transition into the more meditative, like the sound baths?
Yeah.
Grad school.
Mhm.
So getting into grad school and then having thesis advisors. The question that came up, and this certainly comes up in engineering as well. I keep mentioning engineering. This is like a tandem class, right? Am I like tripping? Okay,
Yeah.
good. You're like, why do you keep talking about engineering? So this comes up with engineering as well. So my thesis advisor asked me, what is your expectation of the audience? So from engineering is what's your expectation of the person who's going to use your device? I was coming from a techno background where people, they're dancing, they're moving, and they're watching the DJ. And it didn't quite translate because here I am. I'm sitting, I'm meditating, I'm like having these transcendent experiences of, with like deep meditation. And I didn't show you this completely embarrassing footage of me like crying my eyes out at a festival in the middle of a techno set because I moved up into a state of ecstasy, totally sober. Um, I'm not gonna show that. It's very embarrassing. I'm just like, oh, like ugly crying in front of this like techno crowd. But because I had these experiences, like people are just watching me have these experiences. Like they're not participating. So it was this weird, like, that was the question of my thesis advisors. What do you expect from the audience? And it helped me think of, is there a way to invite them into the process? Is there a way where it's okay for them to close their eyes? Because normally in a music performance, whether it's a band or a DJ set, you're supposed to like pay attention to them. And so by using the term sound bath, to borrow from sound baths where people lie on yoga mats and listen to a gong or whatever, it gave them permission to sit down, to lie down, to close their eyes. And what I didn't expect is they started to go on this journey with me. And so that was the shift, was grad school thesis work and having a great thesis advisor asking questions like, what was your expectation of the people? And can you make it more in line where you invite them into the experience? Which then directly led to people are like, can I put on the EG? Like, can a bunch of us wear the EG? Why are you the only person wearing the EG? And so that also, as an artist, is fascinating. Some artists don't want to do this, but I'm really intrigued by it, to give up authorship. What if it's not my brain making the music, but it's these other people's brains? And I'm just being the technician that helps their brains compose. So it's a really beautiful, it's almost like being of service to the group. Did that answer
I
the
think that's a cool kind of distinction where it's like you can bring people into the work without everyone having to be wired up, because it's more like you're creating an environment that is focused on these different, exploring these different states, like literal states of mind that are kind of being amplified out of your brain, but then experienced like in tandem with everyone else, which I think is like, yeah, as engineers, the tendency is like, oh, everything has to be like wired up, but it maybe like loses track of the idea that we are by nature very sympathetic. Like that's the way that we
exactly.
relate to others, is through this kind of like sympathetic, like we have natural tendencies to like move together through scenarios. And I think that that is like a strategy for making kind of like affective work, that it's a lot simpler than like wiring every single person up with all the sensors, which also looks very like maybe that's a kind of good question after that. It's like, how did you find those experiences different from these more recent works where you have a whole group of people all wearing the sensors? Like, what are the challenges there comparatively? And like, I guess as someone who's making this work, like, what do you prefer? Like, what's kind of led to things that are feeling better in your own practice?
It's a great question. When it was just me, it did feel more culty. Here I am in the center. There's like a circle of people. Everyone's like listening to my brain and my heart. Like there's just this self-centeredness that gets built in if I'm the only one wearing the sensor. And people are moving into these, like, people said wild stuff to me after some of those sound baths. Like they were like, I thought I was you. I forgot where in the room I was. I forgot like how big my body was. I thought my body was the size of the room. Like really trippy stuff just from hearing my biometrics. Some of them were on drugs, but a lot of them weren't. And uh, when they don't have the sensors on, they're more of in a passive state. So they're receiving. And so there is this very clear relationship of I'm the transmitter and they're the receiver. And that's a very distinct state. And you do get into entrainment, and entrainment is a fascinating topic to dive into. Entrainment is, how do I produce a signal? And every time you go to a dance party, you're going through entrainment. Like the DJ has this responsibility, whether they know it or not, that the music they choose, those bass waves moving through the air as they hit your body, are encouraging your body to move in a certain way. That's entrainment. And so something I want to make sure to mention, I forgot to mention, but as you're working with this, if you can send the signal into whoever's receiving it multiple ways, it's going to be more powerful. So if they hear a signal and they see a signal that's aligned with the sound, and if you can work with haptics, so vibration, bass waves, transducers, there's like these vests that are vibration vests, or like, so if you can combine touch, visuals, and sound together, and those signals are coherent, and they're all three of those things are telling the body to move to a certain brainwave frequency or the heart to speed up or slow down. It's going to be more powerful if you send the inputs through multiple senses as opposed to just having a flashing light. Um, when the sensors go on other people, they're much more active because they become the authors. And so I then step into this passive mode because I'm then on the sidelines. I'm just doing the tech and like making sure the audio sounds good. And for me to watch people meditate, it's like going to the store and you're like the paint store and you're like, I want to get blue paint. And you go and you realize there's like 100 different shades of blue. And you really start to pay attention to, oh, this blue is obnoxious and this one's gorgeous. And it's like they're all blue. You really start to dial into the details. And so when you're watching people meditate, when I'm watching people meditate, I'm looking at their smallest, most nuanced moves. Like, did they shift in their seat? Are they grimacing? Are their eyes tense? Are they smiling? You really start to pay attention to those little details. And it's this very different form of intimacy. So I'm looking at them and I'm adjusting the soundscape in real time as their brains are sending me the sheet music. And it's this there's this intimacy that comes up when more people wear it that doesn't happen in the sound baths. The sound baths, I think each person was kind of on their own journey, but when multiple people are wearing it, they start to feel connected to each other.
Mhm.
So it was beyond me. So that's why I mentioned it feels more like an act of service rather than I'm putting this thing on and everyone's listening to me. So it's going from more self-centered and active passive to I think I'm answering that repeatedly.
Yeah,
Great
yeah. No,
question.
it's very useful to know. Just I think, yeah, thinking about especially like how then it gives you the opportunity to compare and find different like synchrony moments between people and like articulate those. Like if two people's brains are producing the same signals, that might be something to like accentuate in whatever sound or visual response you have.
Yeah.
Did anyone else have any other questions they want to ask? Yeah.
Question. Do you have synesthesia? Is that a word?
Yeah, I
Synesthesia?
understand. I don't know. I've worked with people who have like much more clear synesthesia, and they had phenomenal experiences. Having their brain. I mean, it was really beautiful. Like I had a friend in Berlin with synesthesia wear it, and we just did experiments for hours. It was really beautiful. The reason I hesitate to answer yes or no, or why I say I don't know, is I did film scores for a few years. So 2005 to like 2009. And when I look at footage, film footage that doesn't have music, I hear the music in my head. I know what's supposed to go there. Is that synesthesia or is that being a film score? I don't know. So I'm not sure how to answer it. I know other people have much more sensational, they'll hear a sound and it'll be this very clear color, or certain letters or numbers have very clear colors or sounds. So I don't have a strong one. I just have that experience of looking at footage and understanding what music belongs to it.
Yeah, because a lot of, I think, like VJs or like people who do like multi-sensory works, they have like synesthesia. But I
Mhm.
think like for your works, I think the correlations between like visuals and sound are really like it works really well together. And I'm just like curious about like how do you come up with the visual style, like
Mhm.
the color palette where like is that just like your own aesthetic where do you have like a specific way to do
It
this?
is mediated, it's filtered through my own preferences. And you know, that's a part of being an artist and the person who builds it. Like for me, blue is calming and red is stimulating. I've seen other people do more mathematical translations where the slowest waves would be red. Like the deepest bass sounds would be red because red is the slowest frequency in the color range. And then violet, which is this fastest speed, violet would connect with the fastest brainwave. So I've seen people do direct mappings. I've experimented with a little bit, but for me, it's just you know, it's just what feels calming to me as a blue, and what feels like a kind of a more stressful. Sometimes for the highest frequency, I mix them together and it becomes a white color. But it's completely mediated just through my own personal aesthetic.
There like an order, like what comes first, like music first or like visual first? Do you
Music.
usually music?
Yep. I had a past life where I did like flash animations for like 12 years, which I often forget that like my primary job was making visuals. Because I more identify as a musician. So I would start with the music and I see the visual as um, it's probably coming from the techno culture where people don't go to techno shows for the strobe light. They go there for the music and the strobe light happens to accentuate the music. So I treat it in a similar way. Also, when I'm doing these sound baths or these meditation sessions, people tend to close their eyes. So if I make these like big, beautiful visuals, no one's going to see them because everyone's sitting there with their eyes closed. So I tend to do things with pulsation, something you could sense when your eyes are closed. So if my eyes are closed, I could feel if the lights are pulsing. I may not know exactly what color it is, but that heartbeat speed is going to be reinforced through the visuals, even though the eyes are closed.
That's a really great point. And I think we'll get into like we'll do a quick demo. I don't want to keep you too long since it's midnight
I'm
and
good. Good.
but
I'm on a late schedule here. I want to be as much service as
okay.
possible.
That's a really good question. And I think I want to return to that that idea of like how like you were saying, like you just have a feeling like this particular state is associated with this color, just the way that other states evoke different colors. And like it's funny to be like, is that synesthesia or is that just what like kind of like are we trained culturally to think those things? Is it just like an intuition? But I think it's a really like we'll be talking a lot about color in our unit after spring break, where we're thinking like, is our sort of emotional association with color universal? Sometimes I think this discussion is pointing out like it's kind of worth like just asking people and be like, what color do you see? I had a really cool project last year. The students didn't really, they were like kind of on their way there and they didn't quite get there with it, but the thing was you got someone to put the headset on and like actually say like type in like what color they associate with calm, and then they could use their brain to like produce that specific color. And so they would be like sitting in front of a screen with their eyes closed, but it would be kind of so bright that you could sort of see that color rise. And so whoever's watching it is like watching a person meditating on the color blue, but then seeing that color start to swell up. So you're like literally like reading someone's mind. That's like the closest you can get to like reading someone's mind with this stuff. But it's, you know, thinking about the fact that people do have like, you can meditate and focus on like a color, but you can also visualize that. I think the fact of that being kind of like secondary is important here though, because you'll find that these sensors produce much more reliable data when people's eyes are closed. So if you're thinking visually, you're maybe thinking more, as Jason is saying, like these like things that you can actually sense while your eyes are closed. You can actually see a lot through closed eyes. But you know, it'll have to be bright and pretty like, you know, just changing light rather than like specific images and things like that. Unless you're doing it for an audience that isn't wearing the headset, then you can do whatever you want. Okay, anyone else trying to ask a question? It's okay if there are, we have some time. I think this like one really important thing I want to get to before we do the demo, which is kind of homing in on the sort of central research question in this class, which is how do different technologies that can detect changes in the body, how do they kind of correlate with emotional states? And most of what we've been looking at so far, it's like, you know, detecting heart rate, detecting GSR, like skin conductance. Those are related to emotion, but they mostly
Symptoms.
detect arousal, you know, just like, am I at a state of high arousal or low arousal, like physiologically. Now, EEG, similarly, like you're talking about like different levels of stimulation, which is similar but different. But I noticed a few things you mentioned do have like an emotional resonance, and like specifically you kind of showing us a work that was about negative affect and then showing us works that are a positive affect. Like there is kind of a tilt in terms of like emotional valence that we don't really see with those other tools. So do you have any, I'm gonna like make some notes as you talk, but do you have any kind of reflections on those associations between different brainwave states and emotion?
Yeah, there's more of a spectrum that you get just as the brainwave data that comes out is more complex than a heartbeat. You can get a bit from heartbeat, not just the BPM, but once you get to heart rate variability, a lot of device makers rely heavily on heart rate variability, but still about, am I in my parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system? Am I like jacked up or am I calm? And brain waves, you start to get these nuances as you go through the different states. And in the code that we'll be using, I have a machine learning model that you've got muscle tension, which muscle tension is a valid biometric. So you don't have to, you know, if you're getting muscle tension, you know that the person is fidgety, they're stressed, they're uncomfortable. Like you can start to get a picture of how the person is feeling if you're only getting muscle tension off the EEG. If someone then relaxes, we've got focus state. Now, focus isn't emotion, but you can tell that their perception is starting to dial in and that they're paying attention to something. And then you've got a clear mind. And clear mind is very close to calm. I would feel comfortable saying that those are equals or at least very synonymous. And moving into alpha, it's a deeper state of calm. You know that the person is not agitated, and once you get down to theta, it's very cozy, and so I'm comfortable using that word cozy. Does cozy mean happy? Not necessarily, but cozy's nice. So if you start to see that the person's having theta, um, particularly for longer periods, and so it's more not emotions, but states of consciousness
Yeah, and I think there are
or
emotional
detailed
resonance.
then stimulation.
And there's emotional resonance related, like obviously cozy, I think we'd give a positive emotional valence, and maybe like, you know,
Tension.
distracted and tense, we might give a negative emotional valence. And so I just put it on this whiteboard. I
No,
don't know if it's visible. So see, we kind of
yes,
have this axis of arousal and valence, and EEG kind of, it's like tilted,
I
where
agree.
it's still like you could rename arousal stimulation and it's kind of detecting those things, but still, I think there's a lot more kind of like pleasant emotional qualities to the things that are detected by EEG.
I
And
agree.
it's tough to say if like if high beta means you're anxious, but it does, if it's associated with like distraction and these things that I think we can maybe assign in our contemporary culture to have like a negative valence, then that might
Yep.
be, it's a dumbed down way, like it's not that simple,
Ooh, I
but
think that's
be
very
like,
clear.
it might be like a working model just to start understanding what this is doing and how it's a little different than the other things we're doing. So at this point, I I'd like to see it. Do we have, is there a volunteer in this front row who'd be willing to wear the headset? Yeah, all right. So I
Hey,
give you the headset and we're just gonna look. So Jason has been making, I'll kind of show you how to put it on and stuff, but in order to make this work, Jason has been working on some different software that interprets the data that comes out of this. So as he mentioned, it's a Bluetooth device, which is really nice because it's unencumbered by cables and stuff. Like you don't feel like you're connected to a computer. But usually you need some kind of like middleware to be able to get to like grab the Bluetooth data and do stuff with it. There's like a bunch of different programs that do that, but Jason wrote this really handy tool in P5.js, so it's like really easy to work with. And I've been kind of making some tweaks to it. So last year I had one setup that was using this protocol called OSC to send all that data to Max. Jason since has been working on some MIDI based versions, which just basically like treat this like it's a musical instrument essentially. So it's like sending musical instrument control data to wherever you want. Like it could go to an audio software, but I kind of expanded on that a little bit so we can get all that data from the web browser. So that's what P5. There's this new thing in the Chrome web browser where you can just like connect to a Bluetooth device directly in the browser, which is kind of like the key to all this. So, we'll do a little demo. So I'm gonna share my screen actually. Um,
And again, I want to thank everyone there for being total champions and dealing with like a Zoom presentation. So I just want to give my like deep, profound thanks for
oh,
your
thank you. Thanks for coming here at midnight in Berlin.
yeah, no, I just know we all have Zoom fatigue, so I just want to give a special thank you to everyone for being
Thank
great.
you. I just want to make, I want to mirror, so I just have to change my display settings. And for some reason, they never nail it with making this easier. Okay, here we go. Great. So everyone's seeing what I'm seeing, and where did the button go? Here we go. Share. And I'll just share my desktop. Okay, so here we have the actual sensor. So I don't have like a full class set, but we have, I think, about 9 of them. So enough that, people could be working on them for their projects if they choose, and every group will have a set to experiment with. So what you can see is on the part that connects to your forehead, so you can put on like this. I sanitize them all, so they're all don't have other people sweat on them for now. These go on your forehead. This part goes behind your ears. There's a little button that turns it on or off. And when this light is on, it's broadcasting Bluetooth that you can then connect to from the computer. And so just make sure that there's no like hair, like between, like this part's actually an electrode, this black plastic. So just make sure there's no hair between this plastic part and your ear, and make sure this is against the forehead. So you can kind of put it on like a headband. So it's, yeah, exactly. It goes on kind of like that. So they kind of expand. So if it's not fitting your head, they kind of like, you can, yeah, it's a little short, so you can expand it. Can I see it for a second? Yeah, so if it doesn't fit, it like expands to fit, so like these parts pull out. Yeah, so you might just need to pull it out a bit. And this demo probably won't show anything profound about your brainwave state right now, because Jason touched on this a little bit, but usually they have to be on for quite a while, or you have to like literally, like if you go to a neurologist and get an EEG done, they put this like gel on your forehead because it makes a better electrical connection. This kind of depends on the fact that like people have like a bit of sweat on their foreheads, and like that's used. But if you want to accelerate that process, you can like kind of moisten literally just with water, and that'll get closer. But for this demo, that's fine. So yeah, it looks like you've got it on well. And so this software, I've shared the link on the Brightspace. And just so everyone knows, like we're getting this talk today that's going to kind of set the tone for what we're looking at. But next week is when we'll actually be doing like the in-depth, the exploring the software and how to work with this stuff. But just so we know what we're getting into next week. So this software, it's just a P5.js sketch. and you don't have to worry about getting into the code too much. What you're seeing here is these are like all the things that the sensor can detect. So all the raw data is here, delta, theta, gamma, beta. There's a heart rate thing that will show up. There's the battery. And there's also like an accelerometer that detects if it's moving, which weirdly is kind of important because if someone's moving around a lot, the sensor probably isn't going to work very well. So you could kind of build in some feedback if you want to, or you can use it as like a head movement sensor, which is kind of interesting. So on this program, you just hit connect. It'll
The other thing you
find,
can do with accelerometer is detect breath.
oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, so if in general it's still and you're detecting a slow oscillation back and forth, you assume that's the breathing.
Yeah, and you can put it back on. Okay, so it turns off if when it's idling for a while, but now we have the sensor. It just shows up. They all have a serial number. We had this funny problem where like everyone in the classroom's using them. You have to like figure out what your serial number is, but it's printed on the device. And when you hit pair, it's really fast and instantaneous. And so we get all this raw data dumps out in here. Now, there's two sections here. One says, again, delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. Those are those brainwave bands. We have the accelerometer. So if you like move your head a bit, we could see those numbers start to change. Like the Z is kind of high when you're moving your head. And then we'll talk a bit about these in a little bit, but I just want to show the integration with Max. So what's happening behind the scenes here is there's this, I guess it's technically like a networking protocol called MIDI. And MIDI is something that was like invented in the 80s for basically musicians who wanted to connect like a keyboard to their computer or their computer to a keyboard so it could send like, what note am I pressing? But it's weirdly a very robust standard for sending data between applications on a computer, which is very nice. So in order to get this to work on my Mac, I had to do this thing where you go into you search for this thing called audio MIDI setup, and you just have to make sure that this thing called IAC driver is enabled. So if you double click on it, it just has to say devices online. This is like this virtual device that will exchange MIDI signals between the browser and Macs. That's what's most important. And so when you go into Macs, oh wow, I actually haven't seen this yet all dialed up, but now what we
Beautiful.
have here is a display similar to what we were looking at with the heart rate of all of that data. So, you know, in the browser, we're seeing numbers that are jumping around, but what we have in Macs now is all of this data graphed over time. So we can see the way that these different aspects change. Now, something we're noticing right off the bat, like, you know, you've got your eyes open, you're observing. When you move your eyes, like just move your eyes from like left to right, just like look around the room. Delta starts peaking. So we can already kind of see the way that these numbers correspond with noise. Like they're sensitive to muscle movement. Immediate thing you'll notice. Whereas some of the values are a little less sensitive to muscle movement. So Jason mentioned that alpha is one of the easiest things to detect. It's also kind of like one of the more significant things to detect because it says a lot about whether you're in like a creative state, if you're relaxed, like that's typically, I think, a big one that people are trying to detect. But also beta, which represents your I wonder if these are mislabeled. I made this quite close to when we started class. 1 second.
Sure.
Yeah, I have them mislabeled. So I will make a change to this. My gamma is going into the wrong place because I thought beta comes after alpha. So I'm making a change. It's actually giving us erroneous data. But I made a max object that essentially breaks down all of the data that comes from that P5JS app and then just puts it in this object called MIDI EEG. So this is now in that folder. We'll be looking at it next week. Like you don't have to worry too much about it, but I just wanted to yeah, like demo things and maybe while we're observing it, Jason can kind of talk a little bit about what's going on. So we'll talk about the categories below in a second because that's something new that Jason can tell you about. But just based on what we're seeing right now, Jason, what what are we seeing in this data at this point? Like I normalized everything so it's between 0 and 127.
Mhm.
But you know what since what is your name again? Sorry. Yi, since we have a participant that's not meditating currently, that's she's observing, she's
Mhm.
not attempting to enter into some kind of meditative state. What are we seeing here?
My first inclination is that the headset is still loose. Can I see the browser for a second?
Yeah.
Yep. So with the headset, I think Craig showed you, it's like old school headphones where they tighten and loosen. And so when you put it on, really click it and tighten it on your forehead so it tugs behind your ears and you feel it snug across your forehead. And so
Yeah.
click, 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 tighten it. It won't hurt the back of your ears, but it will be pulling your ears out just a tiny bit.
Yeah, so if you can tighten, there's like little bands. So if you get it a little bit tighter, that might be helpful.
And
How,
truly, this is the hardest part of the EEG is just getting a good fit. Once you have a good fit, it's all creativity and exploration. Um, and what we'll see in the browser is that that white line that's jumping up a bunch, that will drop down to the bottom of the screen and be this nice, smooth, low level signal.
okay. So yeah, but once you feel like you have a good fit, maybe after that, I'll ask you to just close your eyes for a minute. You feel like it's good now? Okay, can you like
Let's
close
take a
your
look at the
eyes?
browser. Let's see if
Yeah.
the it's getting there. Nudge it just a little bit tighter. We're getting a spike in the middle there, which is most likely electric noise. So just try to click it
Oh
one
yeah. So try to
notch.
get it a little bit more snug because how are you determining that? Because you're seeing that spike. That's how you know.
It's just too noisy of a signal. Yeah.
I
It's
see.
that's not the brain. That's either electrical noise or muscle tension. But it's getting clear. So the more it drops down towards the bottom of the screen, you're getting a clearer and clearer signal.
Yeah. I typically have a hard time getting my hair out of the way.
Hair is
Uh,
another thing. Like if you can pull your hair back so your hair doesn't interfere with the sensors in the by your ears.
yeah. Oops, we got it disconnected somehow. Maybe is the light still on? Oh no, there we go. Okay, I'll reconnect.
There you go.
Okay, so while you're, yeah, I think it looks, no, it kind of looks like maybe there's like a gap on this side. Yeah,
There you go.
because if you look at the sensor itself, there's actually 5 sensors on the front and then 2 that are kind of acting as the ground. And so each of these has to have quite a bit of coverage on the forehead for it to work properly. Definitely
Could
something
I share
to,
my screen for 60 seconds? I'll show you the signal on my side.
okay, sure. Yeah, so I'm stopping the share here.
Desktop share. Okay, yeah, over here. I've got the same headset. And so I put it on and it's snug behind my ears like glasses. And then I click it tighter and tighter and it starts to tug the back of my ears. And I feel a very snug fit across the middle of my forehead. All my hair is pushed back. So I've got a really good connection here. I'm going to hit connect, select the muse. See how that white line is at the bottom?
Hmm.
That's a good brain signal. Because if it's a little bit looser, it's going to be up there. And so if I tighten it
Uh,
and rest, it drops down to the bottom of the screen. Once you get that
okay,
signal at the bottom of the screen, you're dealing with brainwaves.
okay, that's really good to know. So
Just
I'll
want
share
you
my,
to see that visually so you can compare. Um,
yes.
and again,
Yeah,
like
thank you.
the hardest thing is just getting a good fit. Hey, that's looking good.
Way
There we go.
better. So yeah,
Perfect.
we've done
Perfect.
it. Okay,
Perfect.
so now let's see. So yeah, if you want to maybe just close your eyes for a minute and like kind of look forward, you can like just listen to what we're saying, but still like a challenge with this is also like, again, reduce the amount of noise coming from muscle movement. And if you don't have that noise involved, then what you're detecting is more the actual like brainwave states and what they signify. And so look how much smoother and like lower this data is.
Yeah,
Um,
so if you look at that noise in the lower left, totally flat, which means you have a great signal.
yes. And so, okay, we have this raw data, delta, theta, alpha, gamma, and beta, which I need to
Mhm,
confirm all those things are actually connected to the places that they say they are. Yeah.
mhm.
Nope, it's good now. So right now, you have to also consider something, which is that like these things are not necessarily like equivalent. So like just because there's high theta, like these little moments, those probably have a lot more to do with muscle movement because you can kind of
Yeah,
see them.
blinks or tension. Yeah.
But it's not like there'll be the same magnitude of theta for a similar response in alpha. Like the magnitudes maybe are reflective of different things. And so usually you're wanting to like, this is what the research project is trying to do is like monitor the changes and like how much change do you detect uh, in each of these categories so you can properly calibrate these things. So if you want to use this to control something, you need to know like how much change is expected in each of these categories. Again, like in this class, I didn't really like last year, I didn't really see anyone doing anything meaningful with any of the bands except for alpha and beta. Alpha being
Mhm.
meditative, relaxed, creative state, beta being like I'm distracted, I'm maybe paying attention to a bunch of things. Um, and those ones are kind of more reliable. So you may like see how theta jumps around a lot, or delta jumps around a lot. Delta, you're not really going to detect unless you're putting on someone who's asleep, basically. So you
Sleepy,
might
yeah.
want to ignore that one.
Consider
Theta,
it noise. Consider it muscle
yeah,
noise.
yeah. And same with gamma. It's like it can reveal, there's these emotional kind of resonances with it, but I find that it's harder to see things that are significant that are being detected there in typical cases, especially when you're dealing with participants who like, are not doing biofeedback entrainment or whatever. It's kind of like you're dealing with just people who are going into it the first time. You're going to see more changes in alpha and beta. Now we've got those, and then we have these categories down below that these are new, that basically Jason has trained a machine learning model to look at the waveforms and associate them with different states, which is really, really useful, especially when we're trying to filter out noise versus signal. So there's that noise section in the bottom left that signifies, yeah, when the data is probably like noise, like the headset isn't on correctly. That's great. And then tell us what these other categories are kind of all about.
Sure. And can you sit up straight and relax your shoulders? Okay. So muscle tension is tension in the forehead. So it means that the EEG is on. Otherwise, noise is just the EEG is not a good fit, or it's like lying on a desk and it's just picking up electricity from the outlets or the devices in the room, because those EEG sensors will pick up electrical signals. So muscle tension will show, is someone still, is their face relaxed? If they blink or clench your jaws, you get these spikes, like you see in muscle right there. Focus is Yi, how much coffee did you have today?
No, any caffeine? Okay, that
How
uh,
much caffeine did you have? Like,
did you have any caffeine today? Like coffee or tea? Two coffees.
fantastic, fantastic. So I'm seeing that because I'm looking at focus versus clear. So when you have caffeine, that yellow focus will go up higher because your brain's just churning and like active and like doing stuff. You're also in class. You also are wearing an EEG, and a bunch of people are looking at your brain waves. So of course that's going to be more stimulated. So that yellow focus state is more of a stimulated state. Um, could you attempt to close your eyes and, if you can, clear your mind?
No pressure.
And when I say clear your mind, you can just kind of zone out as if you're like one of the techniques I would use early on is I would like literally look at my phone and my brain would go blank.
Yeah, probably a harder thing to do in a classroom while
Yeah,
everyone's looking at you. But again,
it
this
can
might
happen,
impact.
but I,
This
I
might,
am seeing I am seeing some clear go up. So let's give you 30
yeah,
seconds, 60
you can
seconds,
try again.
and just like try to clear your mind, close your eyes, and uh, just imagine like a clear sky with no clouds.
Yeah, you can close your eyes.
Wonderful. So what you're seeing is a change in the relationship where that focus, that yellow, is going down and the clear has gone up, which is the red. I will be first to admit my meditation algorithm is whack right now. It's just spiking in a way that's it's I need to fix that algorithm. So I think using clear is a more reliable or using alpha waves, the way that alpha compares to um, delta. Do you want to talk about some of those proportional relationships?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is this is really interesting to me because this has really evolved a lot from last year with this machine learning model. And
Oh,
I guess it's kind of like a word of not caution, but just something to be aware of is like this is trained on Jason's brain and the
just my
patterns.
brain.
This is so it's like Jason's brain and the kind of signals that are produced when he is in a clear mind state, when he's in a focused state, when he's moving his muscles around, like that's what's trained the model. So people's brains might be different. This might not be as reliable. That's something you'll learn in your research.
Yep.
Maybe we can follow up with you and like if you had any documentation of how you were able to train the model using your brainwaves, then if people really wanted to go one step further, they could like make their own models and stuff because it's using ML5, which is like a P5JS machine learning library.
Yep.
But these are giving us a lot more detailed information about things that are kind of more like usable, like someone in a clear state of clear mind versus focus. That's kind of more just like we can interpret that much easier than like what's the proportion of alpha and beta, you know what I mean? But something that we'll do, or what a lot of us did last year, is you like see, you almost think about like the tilt. I keep using that word tilt today, but like are things tilting towards alpha more or beta more? Like which of those proportions is more or less? Like that can tell you a lot. So the data on its own doesn't say much, but when you compare them, then you
Mhm.
start getting things that are more meaningful. So you might get like the ratio of alpha to beta, which you can easily do. I can just like basically like divide those numbers and see what comes out. So if I divide alpha by beta, I get a proportion of like how they are, similar or different to each other. And then I can start charting that. So
Yep.
that's something you can experiment with, is like, if the number is, let's see, equal, if the number is 1, that means that they're equal. If the number is less than 1, it means that alpha has a greater proportion than beta. If the number is less than,
Above
my
one.
brain's getting all knotted up, but you know what I mean. So you're getting like a measure of the proportion, which I think is actually more meaningful than measuring each of those separately, because they'll move like in tandem. Like one will reduce while the other is increasing, and that's a good way of saying, okay, someone's shifting from being hyper, attentive and distracted to being more like focused deeper into the body. So the alpha is really more about like having like an embodied sense of relaxation, and beta is more about I'm very like cerebral when I'm thinking about everything that's in front of me, and very like perceptive to the things outside of my body. So perceptive to the inner versus perceptive to the outer, which, again, that does have a lot to do with emotion. So think about that when you're thinking about like possible applications of this too. Yeah, anything else you want to say about these these models, or these new categories? Noise, obviously very useful, telling us when the sensor's not on properly. Muscle, like it's cool that like your eyes are open, you're nodding, like we can see that muscle movement here. Anything else you would want to kind of share about that, or
I
what?
would say ignore meditate right now. My algorithm's messed up for meditate. I think it's not based on an ML model, but I was doing a manual processing of that value, and it's so just use clear, and dream should be good. So if someone starts to fall asleep, you'll see dream go up.
Okay, maybe
Um,
just so I don't confuse people, because yeah, this file's in that same Dropbox folder. I'll just move Dream to where uh Meditate was, and you can just
Great.
ignore Meditate for now.
Yep, that's great. Um, I mean, it looks like it's you'll start to see movement cascade through the different squares. So when the device isn't on yet, it'll be all noise. And then the next step is it'll pick up on muscle tension while you're still getting a good fit. So you'll see it move down to muscle tension. And then most likely it then drops down to focus because it's a good fit. The person's still, but they just put on an EEG, so their brain's going to be pretty active. And then as they sit and relax, you'll start to see that number dip down into clear. And then if they get either very tired or relaxed or bored, dream will start to go up.
Yeah. So it's like you get a pretty comprehensive dashboard. And I guess one thing I'll just point out is like this browser, you need this browser thing open. This is what connects to the Bluetooth device. As far as I know, Max doesn't have like a Bluetooth implementation, but Chrome does. So it only works in Chrome. One other big question mark that I hope to figure out next week, but how many people in here we have a couple PC users? Do we have, yeah. So maybe even before we leave today, I'll just see if we can get the MIDI thing working. Do you have an idea of that MIDI implementation working well on PC?
I really struggled with it with my students at Collaborative Arts.
We'll figure it out. I have a
Yeah,
backup that
the
uses
web Bluetooth works. The MIDI part, I don't know. I don't know how to pass MIDI from Chrome in a PC over to. I was trying to get into Ableton, so that's the part I don't know. Is
there's a backup plan, which is it's this thing called OSC. It
Mhm.
also requires like an annoying third step, which is you have to like run a server that's exchanging data between the browser and Macs, but it works on any computer. So I can show you that if we're having trouble next week. And it's the same information. Um,
The other thing
okay.
I'll mention is that if you're mostly in noise or muscle, you probably won't get a good heart reading because the forehead needs to be pretty still and a good fit to get a good heart rate reading.
Yes, I wanted to mention that too, because we're working with like Arduino based pulse sensors.
Oh, great.
Those are going to be more reliable, even though they're like light based sensors, and they were like picking up on the ambient light in the room in class and not working as well. I find that they work a bit better. I find that I could never get this heartbeat sensor to work reliably. It's not as reliable. So if you're doing pulse stuff, don't use the sensor in there. I mean, it's possible you can get it working well, but it's easier to get the Arduino based one working.
And maybe one last thing I'll mention in terms of if you're doing research was I did some EEG research in 2021 with an opera singer. We were interested to see, we tried it on her and there was way too much muscle tension. So we did some tests where we put EEGs on people listening to music because we were curious about could audience members' brainwave states impact a multimedia opera. And so we had a camera on the person, so you saw their face. I had a video screen of their brainwaves, and then you had another camera feed showing what the person was seeing, which was the singer. And I cannot emphasize enough that if you start merging data points, how invasive and how much of a picture you can get about someone. If you're just looking at their brain waves, that's just one data point. But if you can see their face and you can see what they're seeing, you can start to construct a narrative that is extremely detailed to the point where I went to some of the people after the show and I would ask them like, were you singing in your head? And they're like, how'd you know? It's because I could combine what their face was doing, what their brain was doing, and I could hear what they were hearing because we recorded the audio as well. Another person, totally grumpy face, but his brain waves were through the roof. He was having a blast. So I went to him a few days later and I said, did you really enjoy that experiment? He said, I loved it. Like his face was grumpy the whole time. But because I could see his brain waves and hear what he was hearing. And so when you start to combine that, I mean, that's how social media works is that it doesn't have one data point, but has a bunch of data points and then constructs a narrative. Each data point in itself seems pretty innocent. So for example, if you can track my location, you see that I'm at the bank. You start to construct a narrative. Jason's making a deposit, he's making a withdrawal, whatever. But you just add one other data point, which is the time. And let's say the time is 3 a.m. Maybe he's robbing the bank. So that's the power of combining data points. So if you want to use cameras or other sensors and you start to merge them, you get this very detailed picture of what's going on inside of someone. And with that
Yeah,
comes ethical considerations.
that's a great point to end on because that's something we have to consider. It's like there's no reason why you can't be detecting this, adding the GSR, add the pulse. The next unit we'll be looking at the face and different models that detect emotion from the face. Like all these things on their own might give you a little tiny piece of the picture, but then, you know, how do they combine together? That's a good thing to think about. But then the inverse of that is your user experience gets way more cumbersome the more stuff you add. So, you know, that's where I start thinking about Jason's work that was like, you just create an experience that is based on emotional inputs that brings other people into it. They don't even need to be hooked up to any sensor. It's just about using emotional data to create things, which, you know, might be a better strategy. So lots to think about. Jason, I think I'll follow up with you by email and just maybe see if there's any other resources that people are interested in getting into that machine learning stuff.
Great.
And I just want to thank you so much, both for sharing your work and speaking with us today, but also sharing these really useful tools with us. And I'll be sure to let you know if people are making some cool stuff with it.
Great. Thank you again for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to share with you all.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me. And yeah, I'll talk to you soon.
I'll send you the recording when it's done processing.
Thank you. It was great to meet you all.